Bună seara, doamnelor și domnilor! Vă mulțumim că sunteți alături de noi. Ascultați Radio AVTM, Vocea Europei.
Jó estét, hölgyeim és uraim! Köszönjük figyelmüket! Önök az a Voice Former Radio Európa hangja műsorát hallgatják.
And, good evening ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. You are listening to A Voice for Men Radio, the voice of Europe. A Voice for Men is the flagship of the men's rights movement. And this show is probably the only one at this point addressing the issues concerning men and boys at a European level. If you ever thought that there's something wrong regarding the state's approach to men and their issues, this is the best place to start. This is the place where feminism gets to be called out on its lies and propaganda, and the state is invited to get out of people's lives. Please consider visiting avoiceformen.com and see how the truth in action sounds like. We are here and we don't plan on leaving anytime soon. And now, Lucian Vâlsan shall bring us on today's topic.
Greetings everyone, this is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff lurking in the background and making sure everything works. Greetings, Jon.
Good evening. Is it really hot in your place of the world too?
Yes it is, although we've been spared of extreme heat, at least today. Yesterday it was even worse. But only in the northwestern part where I live, the extreme heat has been more or less absent. I mean, something like 31 degrees, which is great. Yesterday there were 40, and but the rest of the country has been mired into extreme heat. In Bucharest, they were whining that they still had 43 degrees at 6 p.m. So yeah.
Yeah, heat is really annoying because it's not a lot of you can do against it. You can't just, if it's cold, you can just put on another jacket or something like that. If it's too hot, it's a lot less you can do.
Just remove another layer of skin.
Yeah, I guess.
Buy more fans. Yeah, and air conditioning doesn't help either. I mean, I've never been a fan of having air conditioning into the house, at least where I live, for the simple reason that everyone I know who actually got one ended up with the extreme cold within a few weeks after the commencement of the summer. So yeah.
Yep.
Okay then, as said in the announcement, we're trying to get the show shorter and shorter as time goes by. We only have news, although the last one is a bit more about a trend. We'll have a discussion about that when we reach the last one. So meanwhile, let's play the jingle and get to the news.
You are listening to AVFM Radio, the voice of Europe. This is the news.
Okay, the first piece of news is from the Daily Mail. It's called "Courts Should Assume Women Can't Consent to Sex When Drunk. Rape Reports Controversial Proposal. Automatically claim they were raped if they have sex when intoxicated. A controversial report concluded yesterday. Dame Elish Agnoli called for a legal change so a woman could be considered incapable of consenting if she had been drinking heavily. In her wide-ranging report on rape, the experienced barrister said the Sexual Offences Act should be amended to clarify the law on consent where alcohol is involved. Lawyers in Crown Courts currently cite previous rape cases where copious amounts of alcohol have been involved to support their case. Judges and juries then use their common sense to decide if an accuser really was incapable of consenting to sex. But now Dame Elish, a former Lord Advocate in Scotland, has called for a woman's incapacity to consent to be, quote, embedded in legislation. In practice, this would mean imposing an alcohol limit above which women would be considered incapable of consenting. Police would be asked to carry out blood tests on alleged rape victims to establish the level of alcohol in their bodies. They would then calculate how affected she was at the time. If judged to be drunk, the woman would not be regarded as being able to consent to sex. This would make it virtually impossible for a man accused of rape in this situation to claim he believed she said yes. However, it could also open the way for prosecution of men who have drunken encounters with wives or girlfriends, as well as arguments over medical evidence and levels of intoxication. Dame Ellis' call comes after the country's top prosecutor said the legal system should move beyond the concept of no means no to recognize situations where women have been unable to consent. Director of Public Prosecutions, Alison Saunders, said rape victims should no longer be blamed by society if they are too drunk to consent or if they simply freeze in terror. She has issued new guidance to police and prosecutors as part of a toolkit to move investigations into the 21st century. Previous attempts to toughen rape laws with a sex breathalyzer, under which a woman who had drunk a certain amount would no longer be able to consent to sex, have failed. In 2007, the Court of Appeal ruled that the person may be capable of consenting even if drunk. The case involved software engineer Benjamin Bree, 25, whose conviction for raping a student after a night of heavy drinking was quashed on appeal. Delivering the ruling, Lord Judge said the consent could be given even after heavy alcohol consumption. He said it would be impossible to devise a system that would link a person's capacity to consent with how much alcohol had been consumed. Quote, experience shows that different individuals have a greater or lesser capacity to cope with alcohol, and indeed the ability of a single individual to do so may vary from day to day, he said. Dame Elish, the principal of Oxford University's St. Hugh's College, also made 46 recommendations in a preview of the way rape cases are handled in London. She concluded that police and prosecutors needed to undertake radical change in the way they treat victims.
Yeah, notice it has that already expected progressive buzzword in there, the 21st century, as if alcohol and its influence on people has somehow changed since 16 years ago when we were still in that old 20th century. What the fuck is wrong with these people? That's all I have to say.
Yeah. One thing that sort of struck me is this idea that they would that after a woman claims she's been raped, claims she's been too drunk to consent, they perform a alcohol test on her, and then based on her current level of intoxication, they then calculate how intoxicated she was when the alleged rape occurred. But how is that supposed to work? How do they know that she hasn't drunk anything in between?
Yeah, and also how does this work on cases of, I don't know, 6 months old or 3 days old, mind you? I mean, after 3 days,
yeah, I mean,
it should be 0, and if it's not 0, then it's clearly that you've been drinking somewhere in between, and
yeah.
I don't know how relevant.
So I guess this would just work if it's just like a couple of hours later.
Yeah, but then again, most of the victims don't report 1 hour later or 2 hours later.
Yeah. And this is just, I mean, what's really struck me is that they don't even pretend to be gender neutral here. They just talk exclusively about the women being unable to consent. If a man drinks, that's obviously not rape. It's like this creates this ridiculous double standard that if a man and a woman are both very drunk and they have sex, then somehow the man becomes a rapist. It's completely insane.
Yeah, and what's even more insane is that if this were to become a law, most likely it won't, at least not this year, but if this were to become a law, then we'll have to ask ourselves, then how come are individuals accountable if they kill someone whilst they're drunk? Or they're accountable when they kill someone whilst driving, after having been drinking. Yet somehow those exactly same individuals are not accountable if they choose to engage in sex, but of course only if they're women. How does that supposed to work?
I mean, yeah. I guess you could come up with some sort of justification if you're really straining, because you could say that if you drink, then you lower your own sort of your own inhibitions and so on. So and that is basically your own fault. So if you drink and then kill someone, you can still be held responsible because I mean either you willingly killed him, or you or by drinking you became unable to stop yourself from killing him. So it's also your fault. But with rape, basically the idea is that you're just unable to consent, and consent has to be actively given in a sound state of mind. So therefore, it sort of becomes rape. So I mean, I don't really buy that, but I think it's not necessarily a contradiction.
Well, but it is. I mean, alcohol is known to reduce inhibition, as you said, but it is also known to increase anger. So essentially, you elect to when you elect to ingest alcohol, you know what the consequences are, or you should know, and that means that whatever actions you take under the influence of alcohol are still yours, because alcohol doesn't make you change your mind. It makes you act on certain impulses that you would rather not act on otherwise. So for instance, if I'm very drunk, I might make some comments that I wouldn't otherwise do, but they're still my comments. It's not the alcohol speaking. That's nonsense. So why should there be should this apply to pretty much everything except for sex? What makes sex so special?
What makes it so special is that it requires consent, and the argument is that if you're too drunk, you can't give consent. So I do see the point that this is a different situation.
Mm-hmm. I see. Then okay, and then in this case, how do we know? And the Lord whatever, which made the comment, is quoted in the article, said, well, there are different individuals have different levels of tolerance, and indeed even the same individual's level of tolerance may vary depending on the day or the time of the same day. How would the system establish this objectively? Essentially, how much alcohol is too much?
Well, basically, his argument is that it can't be established objectively by some sort of general rule. You have to look at the individual cases and determine whether someone was too drunk to consent.
Yes, and how would that be done? Because you can't do this objectively. You just can't.
Yeah, of course you can't do it objectively, but the criminal system, or generally the legal system, does makes lots of determinations that can't be objectively made, and they sort of do it by heuristics and just trying.
Which is to say, not objective.
Yes, of course. I already told you 3 times it's not objective. But the law was never supposed to be completely objective, and because it's impossible to make a legal system that objectively and clearly specifies exact rules for every single situation, because life is just too complex and there's too many different nuances. So its purpose is designed so that judges have a certain degree of latitude. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a question of weighing, how much latitude do you want to give them, and how much do you want to have fixed rules, because both have sort of advantages and disadvantages.
Okay, then let's move on the portion of how do I put it, enabling false allegations. If this were to become a law, how would the prosecution, for instance, know that the individual, and this can happen, and it will happen if this is to become a law. For instance, let's say I'm a woman and I have sex now. Then I get the hell out of the individual's house for whatever reason, go to the bar, get 300 grams of vodka, and then go to the police and say he raped me. Well, I have evidence that I had sex, and I'm definitely intoxicated. How would the defendant, well, defend himself?
Yeah, that is the big problem with this idea that you just have a fixed limit of so many parts per million or whatever, or parts per thousand alcohol, and then it's rape. It's and just measuring that by doing a blood alcohol test or whatever, it leaves it completely open to this sort of false allegations. But I mean, it's basically a thing where if you want to have this done properly, you do have to have some sort of other evidence, some sort of corroborating evidence to show that you were actually drunk at the time and not just drank afterwards.
Well, we only had been drinking in his house, so there is no way to get corroborating evidence.
Yeah, it's difficult, but I mean, you could make the same argument for all sorts of injuries that you could inflict on yourself to make it appear as if someone assaulted you, for example. And it's also difficult for police to determine that. So
I don't disagree with you, but where I'm coming from is that I would rather have certain guilty individuals get away with it than to have even one innocent caught in the middle. That's my mentality. I know that's so radical with due process and stuff, but I'm not gonna renounce it. The purpose of any sane legal system is built on this premise. The accusation, the prosecution is lying, the defendant is totally innocent until proven otherwise, and and this is the reason why such standards such as beyond all reasonable doubt are put in place, because even if it's a reasonable doubt, it's better to err on the side of the defendant.
Well, I mean, usually, at least in the English system, it's beyond reasonable doubt, not beyond all reasonable doubts.
Yeah, beyond reasonable doubt. Yeah.
So we do accept that sometimes people get innocently convicted if the evidence against them is very strong. You don't need 100%. If you have 99%, that's good enough too. So,
yeah, but the hypothetical situation that I described actually happened a decade ago, but that's a different story. The hypothetical situation that I described will happen if this becomes a law, and the defendant has no chance whatsoever.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not defending this kind of law, but it's the problem here is just that having this idea that just do a test and that's definitive and that's it. That just doesn't work, because, as you said, it's just very much open to false claims. But
it's open to, and not to mention the fact that it's not sex neutral. I mean, if we are to admit that only women are so fragile and can't consent to having sex after they have been drinking, then maybe we shouldn't let women drink in the first place. I mean, does it sound nuts? Well, yes, but because it is nuts, so is this law, or at least these guidelines, whatever.
Yeah, maybe these people should move to Saudi Arabia, then you don't have this problem of women, of drunk women being raped.
Well, actually, in Saudi Arabia, it's not complicated to get alcohol even as a woman. But anyway, that's a different story. We just have to go into the foreign districts. Okay, let's go to the next one. The next one is by Glenn Poole. an individual which is known to be quite often disagreeing with me, and this is one of the articles where it's, in my opinion, mostly wrong. But anyway, coming from the Telegraph, are divorced dads really treated fairly by the family courts? Asks Glenn Poole. Quote, so it's official then. The University of Warwick spent £100,000 researching the family courts in England and Wales and concluded that they don't discriminate against fathers. As someone who has been helping dads navigate the complexities of the family courts for over a decade, I was both shocked and unsurprised at the findings. I was shocked because when you repeatedly see discrimination against dads with your own eyes, it can be baffling when professionals claim it doesn't exist. And then I'm not surprised because the gender political world of family breakdown has long produced an endless list of quote-unquote experts who claim that the courts don't discriminate against separated dads. When such claims are made, many people read the headlines such as anti-father bias is a myth or quote men are treated fairly by the courts end quote, but few of us ever look at the actual research. If we did, this is what we could learn from the latest quote-unquote evidence on the way men are treated by the family courts. According to the report, in 96% of the cases, the parents who applied to court for access to their children are men, with the average case taking between 6 months and 2 years to complete. In just under half of these cases, dads will win the right to have their children stay with them overnight, with the most common arrangement being every other weekend. Just under a quarter will be restricted to seeing their children in the daytime, and the remaining quarter will be given little or no opportunity to be the daddy. According to the University of Warwick, the leader researcher on the project, Dr. Maeb Harding, I think, looked at this data and, quote-unquote, concluded that contact applications by father were in fact overwhelmingly successful. The basis for this claim is that 88% of the dads who applied to court for contact with their kids were awarded some kind of access. For example, 10% were restricted to indirect contact with their children via phone, post, or Skype. A further 5% were only allowed to see their children in the company of a supervisor, and 23% were permitted to spend a few daytime hours with their children. I don't know about you, but when I think of an overwhelmingly successful parent, I don't picture someone who is neither trusted to be alone with their children nor allowed to wake up in the same house as them. And herein lies the problem. Our expectation of the role of a separated father should play in his children's lives is so low that when half of dads who win access to their kids can't even sleep under the same room as their offspring, academics declare this to be an overwhelming success. Is our opinion of fatherhood really so low that we think this sorry state of separated parenting is acceptable? Surely an ambitious, progressive, and caring society should be striving to help every child to have a great relationship with their dads and aspire to have every separated parent fully involved in their children's lives. If 96% of separated parents who had to apply to court to see their kids were women, and half of them weren't allowed to have their children sleep in their same house, would we deem this as a success? Of course we wouldn't. And any system that produces such unequal outcomes for men and women and not only considers that output to be acceptable but deems it overwhelmingly successful cannot be anything other than sexist, biased, and discriminatory. I disagree with that. Anyway, the fact is we live in a society where it is the accepted norm that women should demand equality in the public sphere whilst maintaining special privileges in the private sphere. And probably the most sacred of those privileges is motherhood, where the reproductive slogan, "My body, my rights," gives birth to a deep sense of lifelong entitlement that can be summed up in the maternal mantra, "My baby, my rights." This presumption that women own their children obviously has a biological basis, which has become hardwired in our collective psyche and written into our laws. In 2015, it is still the case that mothers and fathers do not have equal rights. As the former Equal Opportunities Commissioner Duncan Fisher explains, quote, "In the UK law, a father can only be a father if the mother approves him. She can do this in two ways, by marrying him or inviting him to sign the birth certificate. If neither of these happens, he is not the father until the family court approves him. A man has to be vetted by the mother or the state before he is allowed to be a father." The entire system of parenting in the UK is set up around the presumption that mother knows best and that when parents separate, there should be a primary parent, nearly always the mother, and a secondary parent, nearly always the father. And goes on for one or two paragraphs. But yeah, I just think Glenn Poole is definitely correct overall, but he just argues it so poorly. I mean, the fact that the system produces unequal outcomes doesn't necessarily mean it's sexist or discriminatory. It just doesn't. Now, we know that the family court system in the UK is secretive and misandric and we know that. But the very simple outcome of it, it's not necessarily evidence of that. It's just not.
Repeat after me. Correlation does not imply causation.
Yeah.
It's just it's just an incomplete argument. You can't just say, here is a statistical difference, so therefore this is why there is a statistical difference. You first have to, examine several plausible hypotheses and rule out the competing ones, and then you can say with some degree of probability that this is why fewer dads get custody or whatever. You can't just say fewer dads get custody, therefore they're discriminated against. It just doesn't work like that. Admittedly, this is how arguments in the public in our age are very often made. Talking about things like the gender pay gap and so on. So this is certainly not a unique failing of Glenn Poole. It's a mistake that gets made all the time by lots of people on all sides of all sorts of issues, but it's just a bad argument.
Yes, it is. And since we're not feminists, we usually criticize those who agree with us as well. And it's not just an incomplete argument, but it weakens the overall argument. Because, he is correct when he says, well, look, this is not overwhelming success when over half of them are not even trusted enough to be alone with their children or allowed to wake up in the same house with them. That's a good argument. But then when you get to with the statistical unequal outcomes, and then on that basis alone you deem it sexist, no, that's just lame. It's just not a good argument. Overall, I share Glenn Poole's feeling that I'm not surprised at all at the quote-unquote findings of the University of Warwick. I mean, this is not the first nor the last time when feminist academics spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, euros, whatever, pounds, taxpayers' money to do advocacy research. And I say feminists because I looked at the original study and took a little peek into about the author. And the author teaches sociology from a feminist perspective. It says that on the official university's page. And the author happens to be Swedish. What a surprise. What a surprise. A Swedish academic found out that there is no misandry in the family court. Call me surprised. I'm very surprised. I'm shocked, really. It's just like the communist economists just happened to find out that capitalism is bad. It's such a surprise, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, that is another problem. It's just very, very easy to lie with statistics and with these kinds of studies, and you don't even have to make false claims. You can just make very misleading claims, like that 96% of cases are a success or whatever it says in this report. When success means for some very wide definition of success, and most people will not take the time of looking at exactly what they talk about when it comes to access.
Yeah, so essentially they define success in the sense that you didn't see or you are legally allowed to hear even the voice of your child before, and after the court has granted you the right to call them on Skype once a week, and that's counted as success in this report. Come on, give me a fucking break. Yeah,
this is why it's just really important if you hear one of those attention-grabbing headlines, X% of people think Y or whatever. You always have to look carefully at what was the actual question asked, and how are these terms defined and so on, because often they are very misleading.
Yep. Okay, now I'm afraid to go to the next one because it's from my own backyard. We just pulled a Sweden here from the economics department of the hotnews.ro. The Council for Combating Discrimination fines ACR for a campaign that is internationally awarded, a campaign called #SeatBeltBoobing, because of its misogynistic content. ACR is Automobil Clubul Român, the Romanian automobile club, I think. Yeah. ACR has been sanctioned by the National Council for Combating Discrimination for its internationally awarded campaign #SeatBeltBoobing, meant to encourage wearing of the seatbelt. According to a communique by the Coalition for Gender Equality, the council fined ACR with a civil fine of 2,000 lei after this organization signaled that the messages and the images included in the campaign, quote, harm the right to personal dignity of women because of its misogynistic content, end of quote. The decision of the council comes 1 month after ACR received the Grand Award for automobile safety at the innovation category during the latest conference at the International Federation of Automobile, which happened in Tunis. The Coalition for Gender Equality argued that the way in which the campaign was presented on the ACR's website and the Facebook page and the clip of the campaign is inherently misogynistic because it reviews the types of breasts that women have by correlating them with fruits or vegetables depending on the size and encouraging women to photograph themselves to wear the seatbelt in order to contribute to the sensibilization of the public to wear seatbelts. The campaign was launched last September by ASR and the agency Publicis Romania. According to the recent communique by Publicis, the campaign was I don't know how to put it. The campaign reached out the TV and the online on several continents, whatever. The Wednesday communique by the Coalition for Gender Equality shows that and it lists quite a lot of NGOs in here, have filed a complaint in December 2014 against ACR and Publicis Romania, signaling that this campaign puts women in a degrading and humiliating situation. The campaign has a pornographic character and has no connection whatsoever with automobile safety and the measures to enforce those, end of quote. According to the decision taken by the Directorate Council of the National Council for Combating Discrimination, it says that when the fine was calculated, it was also taken into account the fact that the clip was made in the way to raise awareness of wearing seatbelts and using objects and gestures with the sexual tent, I guess, with the sexual leading, through which women are being placed into degrading situation. And also the same coalition expresses again that, well, there are outrage and whatnot. And then it goes on a bit more to list all the members of the coalition. Now, in the link, which I placed in the chat room, you can see the video for yourselves and judge it for yourselves. As far as I'm concerned, the National Council for Combating Discrimination is just full of shit. I mean, Denmark didn't ban it, which is far more feminist in nature than this country. Why the hell? I mean, what is the business of the state to what? And this sounds like something between something that the censorship committee of the Communist Party would have done in 1988. Except for the Gulag part. Well, yeah, in 1988 they would have also admitted the director to some mental hospital or something. Now they didn't do that, but still.
I don't know. To me, that the whole thing just sounds stupid from start to finish. Like, I don't really see a great merit of this sort of campaign, but also there's the idea that this would show women in a degrading way or something just because you have a woman wearing a seatbelt. It's like, what?
Yeah, I don't see the merit of the campaign either, but that's not really the point. I mean, ACR just competed against other similar associations from other countries at a competition, and they won a competition. And that's it. I don't care how meritorious the campaign is in and of itself. It wasn't really that popular here. Actually, most people heard of it after this news broke out. Until then, nobody even knew it exists. Apparently, it was far more popular in Western Europe than in here. But regardless, so what? And pornographic? Come on. There's nothing pornographic in that video. I encourage everyone to just look at the video and tell us in the comments section if they see anything wrong with it. The video also has English subtitles, although there are something like 20 words spoken in it anyway. So I don't know. Just take a look at it yourself, and if you think it's wrong, well, then at least we can have something to debate. I don't think it's wrong. I just think it was a silly clip made for a silly competition, and then the fembots just blew it out of proportion, and the state just indulged in their nonsense. Just how I...
As they want to do.
Yeah. Okay. Going to the next one, coming from milanopost.info. Genitori separati, lei vegetariana e lui no, in tribunale per l'alimentazione del figlio. Separated parents, she's a vegetarian and he isn't, battle in court for their son's alimentation. Milan, May 29th. With the mother's boiled rice and vegetables, and with dad's binge eating at fast food, the nutrition of a divorced couple's eldest son came at odds, and the question on whether to have steak or not to have steak was taken to court, according to the paper L'Eco di Bergamo. The mother of the boy has since 2006 adopted a macrobiotic diet and imposed it on her son. When the father found out, he accused her of not involving him in that choice and of threatening the health of the young boy. The father initially tried to sort it out amicably and then gave the kid meat, the dairy products, and sweets during his custody time. Or so says the wife, whilst lamenting that the 12-year-old came home with stomach ache after weekends spent with the father. The aches, however, were determined to be at least partly due to the lunches served by the mother, which consisted mostly from polenta, cheese, and vegetable sausages. The ex-husband eventually turned to the court and to ask the court to take, quote, in the absence of agreement between the parents, take the appropriate measures with regards to the diet of the child. And the judge ruled that the mother should put meat on the table at least once during the week, whereas the father does not have to do the same for more than twice over the weekend. This is that kind of case where on one hand, I can sort of see why the judge shouldn't be involved in such a level. On the other hand, it kind of makes sense to me. I mean, forced vegetarian diet on kids is kind of quite known to be a risk factor.
I completely disagree with this ruling. Okay, first of all, in this case, this boy did not actually have a vegetarian diet. He was with his father most weekends, so he basically ate meat twice a week, which is, I think, perfectly sufficient, and I don't really see any sort of problem here. Also, I think the idea that which wasn't in this article, but in a German one I read about the same case, that that they brought in some sort of nutritional expert, and this expert basically said that the ideal meat consumption is three times a week. So they've now dictated that the mother has to prepare one meat dish for the child, and the father is only allowed to give the boy meat twice on the weekends. So they've sort of perfectly regulated exactly how much meat does this boy need to eat, which is just completely ridiculous. I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty when it comes to nutritional science, and you can basically for every kind of opinion you want to support, you can have a couple of studies that support that and a couple of studies that refute it, and there's just a lot of uncertainty still about what exactly is a healthy diet. So the idea that you just sort of uh, by government power decree that one particular diet is optimal and you must not deviate from that is just completely ridiculous to me.
Yeah, and frankly, there will always be uncertainty when it comes to nutritional science, unless only 200 people survive somewhere on a high-tech ark outside of this planet. But otherwise, there will always be uncertainties because, well, individuals have different physiologies, and therefore their metabolism processes food differently. So, yeah, that's why I'm not convinced of that expert argument. But yeah, I didn't see that. I didn't think about that, and you're probably right. I mean, the kid was getting meat at the end of the day, somewhere in the weekends or whenever he saw his father. So at least that was somehow compensated. And I agree that those so-called stomach aches could have been caused by the rather bizarre meals served by the mother. But the judge's ruling doesn't address that at all. It just forces the mothers to cook or to provide a meat meal once a week, which, even if applied, which I assume it won't be applied, it's Italy. I mean, nobody really cares about that. But let's say the mother obeys the order. That won't address the root cause, and that is to say, the parents do enforce radically different view of nutrition or alimentation, and that may in and of itself be the problem, not whether the kid gets two meal meats per week or 3 meals meats per week. That seems rather minor.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that this is probably the bigger problem here, that these parents are so at odds with each other that they can't come to some sort of amicable resolution there and have to go to a judge to determine their son's diet, which is completely ridiculous. So I think that is a much greater problem than whether this boy eats meat twice or thrice a week. And yeah, also I like, even if this boy would not regularly visit his father and therefore would not get any meat in his diet, I still don't think that a judge should come in and decree that this woman has to give meat to her son. Because I mean, in my sort of uninformed opinion, I do think that a purely vegan diet is inferior to a balanced diet that contains meat and dairy and eggs and so on. But I'm not really sure about that. I might be wrong, and probably much more important than whether you eat vegetarian or you eat meat is just what kinds of food you get and how varied your diet is, and how balanced it is, and so on. I mean, you can have a very unhealthy diet that contains meat, and quite a healthy diet that doesn't contain any meat. I mean, having this sort of diet that the mother prepares is probably far superior than eating Burger King and McDonald's every day, or other kinds of fast food and junk food. And I mean, parents who feed that sort of stuff to their kids are not sued in court, and they're not forced to cook fresh meals for their children a certain number of days per week. So I just think this ruling is just completely ridiculous, as completely unwarranted intrusion into parents' rights over their children, and I think it should just be completely rejected. And even if even people who sort of don't like veganism and so on, I think should still condemn this kind of ruling.
Yeah, a few completions to that. Bergamo is a very small town in Italy. I doubt there is any McDonald's or Burger King in there. So, I mean, in Italian, virtually everything that you can get pre-cooked is called fast food. Although the difference in quality between them is let's put it like this, extremely diverse. I mean, you can get fabulous food that in Italy is still called fast food, even though it's not in the way that you and I, big city type, would think of fast food. So yeah, there may be that. I mean, for instance, think about like this, a tiny restaurant that has some of its food already pre-cooked. That may still be counted as fast food legally, even though it's not. So yeah, there's that, and then there's the part that, again, disobeying this order brings limited to no consequences. So I'm almost convinced that the mother would just disobey it. And whilst I agree that the judges shouldn't be involved in these, the Italian structure of the Italian legal system says that essentially when a parent brings such a case in front of the court, the judge has to issue a law, an order or something. The judge can't throw away these kinds of cases. They just can't in family disputes. Sure, they can avoid initiating the hearing, but that's quite a complicated process. And given that this hearing doesn't come out of thin air, but it was requested by the father, the judge didn't really have a choice in there. I don't want to defend Italian judges; they usually suck, but in this one, it just didn't have a choice.
Well, can't the judge just say, you have a stupid complaint, get the fuck out?
No, there is no get the fuck out in family law complaints. Unfortunately, it's quite recent. One of the supporters of this model of guideline was a woman that we've heard her name before. Her name is Alessandra Mussolini. Yes, she's related to that Mussolini, and it's been a while since this kind of thing is pretty much into force almost everywhere. Now, again, Italy has a very bizarre system, legal system. Essentially, it's kind of like a federal republic, but not really a federal republic, and some of the laws are just contained to old ducats that used to exist before modern Italy. It's quite complicated to explain, which is why it's better you don't look for an Italian lawyer when you need something. You look for an Italian lawyer in the area where you want to do something, because that's, and by the area I mean sometimes even including the neighborhood you need. So you don't look for the county or something like that. Okay, so yeah, I don't know what to say. Forced vegetarian diet is kind of a risk factor, but on the other hand, in this case, it's far more grayer than in other cases. And yeah, but I mean, the judge could have ruled something like this. Well, look, if you're both so adamant about this, why don't you enforce both of your rules during your time allocated, and that's it. I guess he could have done that, though. Yeah, and it would still be under the law. I mean, the judge just ruled, and get the fuck off, I guess. But yeah, bringing nutritional experts into such a petty dispute, I guess that's it costed more. I mean, they could have just bought more quality food, both of them.
Yeah, definitely. The court proceedings definitely are not cheap.
Yep. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from UE24.ac from Austria, and it's called Parents Don't Want Gendering in School Books. And what they mean by gender or gendering is sort of using a gender-neutral language, and often with sort of bizarre, made-up kind of words and conventions, where you like put the capital I's in the middle of words, or put asterisks in the middle of words, and create these horrible linguistic monstrosities. So to the article, parents' unions are starting an initiative called G-Gendern against gendered school books, and G-Gendern is some sort of bizarre portmanteau of the word gendern and gegen, so it's like against gendering. Bad news for Gabriele Heinisch-Hosek, who we've of course heard of a couple of times already here, Minister for Education and Women. The Federal Council of Parents' Unions, BEV, are organizing a rebellion against gender neutrality in language. Tomorrow, the outraged parents introduce the initiative G-Gendern. They seek to assert themselves against gendering in school books. Luga supports this initiative. A poll cited by the BEV showed that 87% of the 23,000 respondents opposed gendering in school books. The parents are supported by Team Stronach politician Robert Luga. He will be taking part in a presentation of the anti-gender initiative tomorrow. The Ministry for Education has thus far not issued a reply. So, sort of coming back to the point we made earlier about studies and looking exactly at what they ask, I don't know exactly how they phrase this question, which matters of course a lot if they provided specific examples of especially egregious types of gendering, as they call it. So I'm not 100%. I'm not completely convinced by this study, but I do think it's not far from the truth, because this sort of gender-neutral language just in general is not popular at all. At least, judging from my experience in Germany, and it seems that in Austria there's even more resistance to this kind of neologisms. And the curious thing is that quite frequently, in my experience at least, women are actually less inclined to use these gender-neutral forms. They will often just use the generic masculine, even sometimes in cases where it's incorrect to do so, based on the traditional rules of German grammar. They will often use the generic masculine to refer to themselves, which is really incorrect, but it's quite a frequent thing you hear in sort of casual speech. So this sort of idea that people are, or that women in general are offended by this sexist language or something like that, it's just not borne out. It's just this vocal minority of mostly feminists who have a problem with this kind of sort of non-gender neutral language. But most people, they just don't really give a damn, and they just use the language that they're accustomed to and that is traditional, and that sounds reasonable, and it's simple to use, and they don't care about about putting in asterisks to signify trans people or whatever that's supposed to mean, and all that sort of other stuff. They just want to use language as a tool and not as a way of signalizing their ideology.
Yeah, language is a tool for most people. For progressives, it's a weapon. The actual meaning of words doesn't really matter, provided that the agenda is being forwarded. And no, I'm not joking. Now, to the credit of the progressives, when they propose some nonsense like this, their argument usually goes, and I know quite a bit about that because, well, I've studied quite a few languages during my lifetime. The argument is, well, language is something lively and it evolves and it's not something fixed and rigid and whatnot. Well, that's true. But on the other hand, because the language is not something fixed, it's usually its speakers who slowly, you could say progressively, but far slower than our progressives would like to believe, change it or alter it, but in very tiny steps, not something to be done from, I don't know, in 2 years. Think about it this way. Sometimes I have problems understanding some articles in the Swedish mainstream media, and I ask Swedish people, well, can you please translate me this sentence? And the answer I usually get is, I don't know what it means. I mean, in Sweden, the pressure amongst the so-called intellectual elites has been to change the language so far that there are portions of the mainstream media in Sweden who literally write in incomprehensible language for the common Swede. I don't ask them to pander to my Swedish, which is admittedly slightly more limited than the native Swede. But if native Swedes can't understand at all what is meant in long sentences, in the sense that, you know, or sometimes I ask some certain words, what do they mean? And I look in the dictionary, they're not in the dictionary, or I look them on Google and I only find them in 1 or 2 places, which is usually one feminist blog and one mainstream newspaper. That's wrong. And that's not how language evolves.
Yeah, and that is an important point, is that language evolves. It's an evolutionary process. It's not something that is dictated from top down, and it's a sort of a gradual grassroots change that, you know, a lot of people want to express some sort of new concept, and then they start using new language, and then more and more people pick it up if it's a useful term, and then it starts to enter the general vocabulary. It's not some sort of elite institution deciding, you know, we want to get some new gender neutral form, so we will you know, put asterisks in words and such. No, it doesn't work like that.
Yes, and if you look into the linguistic academies that formed, I don't know, in the last 200 years, let's say, so we won't put the academy that regulates the Latin language because that's slightly older, but let's take more recent ones. They usually, especially when they started to emerge into existence, they usually picked up what was already there amongst people, and if they tried to apply any regulation, it was usually more or less stylistical. I mean, in the sense of, well, look, this E is actually not necessary in this word because we don't pronounce it this way. Things of that nature, small things, and even those took 100 years to take roots into the language. And I'm thinking here particularly at the Norwegian language. You know, the Norwegian language in written didn't exist until 1890, if I remember correctly, or 1885, something like that. Until then, people in Norway, if they wrote at all, they wrote in Danish. And when the Norwegian language started to be codified in written form, it still took 40 years for people to start using it to begin with, because everyone was accustomed to write in Danish. And then when they started using it, most of the Norwegian Academy's regulations were discarded out hand because the public just found better ways to codify it. And then the Academy just picked what the public essentially expressed and introduced that as a regulation. So most language academics work like that. They pick up what the public says, and they just codify and only slightly alter it.
Yeah, it works mostly as in a descriptive way rather than a prescriptive way.
Yes, that's exactly the phrasing I was looking for. Yeah, it's more like descriptive. Look, the population in this area writes like this. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe this E is or this F is too much, but something like that. I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, neither. The word neither in Romanian used to be 2 words at one point because communists said so. And believe it or not, the population wrote it as one word for 30 or 40 years. And then when eventually the population started using the separate version because, well, it's been for a while, then the communism fell, and the post-communist academy said, "Well, wait a minute, this is nonsense. This has been around for 100 years or more. It's with one word." So not even a totalitarian regime was unable to change stuff in the language to such an extent, and they're expecting to change the language to a far greater extent, because in here it was just you have to leave a space in the middle of the word. But in here to put asterisks and extra capital letters, that's too much.
Yeah, though I will say that that I sort of in the abstract agree that agree with the idea of gender neutral language in cases where that is appropriate, where you want to talk about people in general. But the thing is, it has to actually sound reasonable. Well, it has to be simple to use, and it has to be elegant. But a lot of the but basically all of the sort of popular ways that feminists and other people concerned with this topic have come up with are like either sort of really cumbersome, like just staying with English examples, because if I start studying German examples, that's probably not really accessible to most people here. But talking about using terms like he or she, it's like just much longer than just saying he, or talking about human beings instead of just using the word man, as in just as something like man is a rational animal. That's very short, very elegant. But human beings are rational animals. That's really long, and it just loses a lot of elegance. So that is my primary concern with this sort of gendering and or this sort of gender neutral language. And a lot of the German examples are really much worse than what you hear in English, and this is why in the last couple of years, or really the last couple of months, basically, there has been quite a lot of resistance, especially in Austria, against this type of gendering, as they call it.
Yeah, and for good reason. I mean, German is a difficult language, making it even more complicated. And how do you explain to kids words that have stars in the middle of them? I mean, that's in and of itself, it's a task, which is a fair question in my opinion. I mean, I'm trying to imagine myself, again, as I said, I taught in schools in a few occasions. I'm trying to imagine myself, how would I explain this to students? Well, from now on, we're going to put asterisk in the middle of this word because potato. How do you explain that to a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old? At what age do they start learning to write in Austria? In here, it's 7.
Yeah, something like that, 6 or 7.
Yeah. How do you explain to a 6 or 7-year-old? Well, this word that now actually has an asterisk. Well, but none of my books in my house have asterisks. Well, but now it has. How do you explain this to kids?
Yeah, it just adds a lot of unnecessary complication and
confusion.
And it's just something that most people don't use it. If you look at the at the mainstream media, even the sort of even most of the sort of at least the moderate left-wing media don't use these kinds of gender neutral forms in most cases. It's basically it's basically with it's feminists use that. It's a lot of people in sort of public in public functions like politicians and so on. They always talk. They address citizens as Bürgerinnen und Bürger instead of just saying Bürger, just citizens. Because, Bürger is technically the male form, but obviously if you talk about Bürger in the plural, you're obviously not just talking about the male ones unless you specifically say that you are. It's just
To give an sorry to interrupt. To give an English analogy to that, think of it as an Oscar presenter saying, "Dear actors and actresses." Even in English, it sounds bizarre. I mean, German, just like English and most languages in Europe, actually, except for Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian. In some way, shape, or form, they base on the Latin rule of masculine neuter. And that is to say, the masculine form routinely also is the neutral form. There are exceptions to that rule, but not too many of them. Why waste so much space? And hearing you talking about how the media, even the lefty media, doesn't use it. I remember an article written here in a communist platform, but they call themselves reformed communists. So they essentially support radical feminism, radical environmentalism, and everything you would expect in a far left platform. And even they don't use sort of progressive language. And one feminist was very angry that not even they are picking up on the sensitive language thing. And the administrators there say, well, look, we write in order for the people to understand us. If we start delving into all sorts of gibberish, even our supporters won't understand damn thing.
Yeah, but just to clarify, it sort of depends on what sort of left-wing newspapers you're looking at. Like if you look at the Taz, for example, they do use this sort of
Taz is special.
Gender stuff. They usually, I think, use this binnen-e, where they put basically their gender-neutral form is the female form, but with the I at the start of the suffix capitalized, which is then supposed to be vocalized by like a very brief pause, which in actual speech you probably can't hear if you're not listening to it. So just when you hear that pronounced, you just probably just assume that you're talking specifically about the female form. So if it's ZuschauerInnen, it's just viewers as female viewers, and you don't even hear the difference between the female form and this supposed gender neutral form. So it's quite stupid in my opinion.
Yep. Something similar was proposed here as well, and the proponent, a lefty woman, was essentially the entire media's laughing stock for 2 days, and then everyone forgot about her existence entirely. So yeah, something remarkably similar was proposed here as well, something like 4 years ago. Yeah. Okay, sorry to everyone about the long discussion about languages, but it's a subject that I really like, and it also pisses me off when feminists mess around with my languages. So yeah, okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, this one is from the Telegraph from the UK. Calls to refer to God as a woman as female bishops take up posts. Support is growing within the Church of England to rewrite its official liturgy to refer to God as female following the selection of the first women bishops. Growing numbers of priests already insert words such as she and mother informally into traditional service texts as part of a move to make the language of worship more inclusive, it has been claimed. But calls for a full overhaul of liturgy to recognize the equal status of women have already been discussed informally at a senior level. It comes after the Transformation Steering Group, a body which meets in Lambeth Palace to examine the impact of women in ministry on the Church of England, issued a public call to the bishops to encourage more expansive language and imagery about God. Hilary Cotton, chair of Women in the Church Watch, the group which led the campaign for female bishops, said a shift away from the traditional patriarchal language of the Book of Common Prayer is already at an advanced stage in some quarters. Quote, the reality is that in many churches up and down the country, something more than the almost default male language about God is already being used, she said. quietly clergy are just talking about God as she every now and then. The response you often get at one end is, why does it matter? Because God is beyond all this. At the other end of the reaction is, you mustn't, because Jesus calls God Father. Mrs. Cotton said that while congregations were already experimenting with new terminology, it was time for the issue to be considered by the Liturgical Commission, the body which drafts official service books, as well as those drawing behind a planned new catechism. Quote, until we shift considerably towards a more genderful expression in our worship about God, then we are failing God and we are missing something, she said. We are also going to miss some of the opportunities that otherwise particularly women might feel themselves called to. Her comments came following a discussion at the Westminster Faith debates on whether the consecration of women as bishops would change the Church of England. The Church of England's worship already includes some references to God as female, many of them centuries old. A spokesman for Lambeth Palace emphasized that the steering group is independent of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and that any change in liturgy would have to be approved by the General Synod.
Oh boy. For starters, I'm an atheist, and I view religion just like I view any other kind of nerdery or mythology and whatnot. So strictly from that perspective, according to the mythology, God is the father of Jesus. Well, that kind of ends the debate on how you refer to God, in my opinion. It just is. I mean, the father of Jesus is a woman? Really? How's that supposed to work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also an atheist, and I would like to see the role of religion diminish in society, and would like for people to become less religious, and I guess this sort of initiative is a good step towards that. But from their point of view of encouraging people to be religious and to go to church more and so on, and to become more involved. I think it's just a horrible step because it just seems completely arbitrary. It's like, you worshipped God as male for hundreds of years, but oops, we just recently discovered that he's not actually male, or that he's only male half the time or whatever. It's like, how is that supposed to work? I mean, I think it will just alienate a lot of religious people, many of whom are, of course, more sort of conservative and who are sort of more hostile to these kinds of innovations. And I think it's just a horrible move on their part.
Yeah, and considering from a PR point of view, when Church of England is already in a minority within England, I mean, most of something like 42% of the UK population is Christian. Of those 42%, only a portion of them belong to the Church of England. The others obviously belong to either the Catholic Church or various other denominations. So when you're in that position, you better stick to your base as much as possible and don't make PR nightmares and internal scandals like this, unless of course your purpose is to utterly diminish it even further. It also shows how much weakness there is when the church is not separated by the state. I mean, the Westminster faith debates, and that's something you can only see nowadays probably in the UK, and that's pretty much it, or maybe in Malta, and yeah, that's pretty much it, because everyone else has slowly understood, for at least for the most part, that the state shouldn't dictate church's affairs and the church shouldn't dictate the state's affairs. And yeah, I mean, in Britain, I think the Queen Elizabeth is still the head of the Anglican Church, isn't she?
She's not called head. She's some sort of other title. I'm not, but it's eluding me right now. But it's not head. But she's, called the defender of the faith and something else too.
When did the rule change? I mean, I thought that the monarch is the head of the Anglican Church. When did that change?
I think it was never really called head, but he's basically.
Well, in de facto terms, yeah, but probably the official title was never held head, but in de facto terms, I mean, why shouldn't they be totally separated? I mean, look, for instance, in Norway, it was the churches who demanded that they be separated from the state in 2013. I think it was the Avskaffenlagen, the Abolition Act, the Abolition of State Church Act. And good for them. I mean, they collaborated with the Danish church, the Danish state church, and they asked them to also demand this from the Danish government. And the Danish church eventually said, "No, we're okay with being a state church." And there you go. Now in Denmark, the state obliges them to officiate gay marriages, and everyone is pissed off about that. Whilst in Norway, when they passed some sort of gay marriage act, the Church of Norway say, "We're not going to do that. Good luck with your secular agencies. This is the Church of Norway. We don't do that." And that's fine. So that's another example where the church should be separated from the state. As on the broader point, whether ordaining or consecrating women as bishops would change the Church of England, of course it would change. Anytime a woman comes into a man's space, it changes the dynamic. We know this for centuries. And it goes the other way around too, when, for instance, there are 100 nurses and 0 male nurses in a hospital, and then suddenly 1 or 2 or 10 male nurses are employed in there. It changes the environment. It just does. We know this is true. I don't see where the debate is. Whether it would change or not. What?
I mean, of course, it's going to change things. I mean, that's sort of the point. If it wouldn't change anything, then why would you even
consider it? Yeah.
Make this reform? The question is whether it's a change for the better or the worse. Then that is, of course, up for debate. But saying that it won't change anything is just obviously wrong. Also, the idea that just because you're now also ordaining women that you have now certainly have to refer to God as female is just completely stupid. I mean, like for example, the Lutheran Church allows female ministers for a very long time, and they haven't started calling God a woman or something like that. It's a completely separate issue.
Well, not all Lutheran churches. Some Lutheran churches don't. For instance, the Lutheran Church in here, which is also run by German ethnics, does not ordain women as ministers.
Oh, it's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, again, as an atheist, I probably shouldn't care that much. On the other hand, it's just I mean I'm sure for the gender ideologues that are behind this, it's probably just another institution that is for them to subvert. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that 10 years from now, whatever remained of the Anglican Church will teach a sort of a Duluth model of domestic violence, and they say that it's in the Bible and things of that nature. I could totally see this.
I guess it's great news for the Catholic Church because
not really. The Catholic Church
converting to Catholicism. If this change goes through.
Short term, probably you're right. Short term. Long term, not really. Catholicism also has its own interior struggles with this, because there is a quite significant congregation within the Catholic Church, something I call Catholic feminism or things like that. I remember reading a study about that by a more conservative Catholic priest who examined their literature, and it's quite numerous, quite a lot of literature by a diverse range of authors who essentially try to argue feminism from a Catholic perspective. Imagine that. Two mythologies arguing each other. It's fabulous. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to the last one, which is quite long. I tried to shorten it as much as I could, and still I think it's not short enough. But anyway, it's a very bizarre case, but it raises quite an important point, and this is about sexting trend in prosecuting kids for stupidities, admittedly, but, well, anyway. Coming from Adevăr, 3 elevi minori din Bârlad la un pas de pușcărie au spart contul de Facebook a unei prietene de 13 ani, setând o poză în care apare din postaze porno. 3 minor female students from Bârlad, that is my home area. I've stopped living there a decade ago, but anyway. One step to going to jail. They hacked the Facebook account of a 13-year-old girlfriend, setting at her profile a picture in which she appears in pornographic positions. I guess it would be the correct translation. The district attorney from Vâlsan County has yesterday charged 3 girls from the Perian village who are students in the high school in the high schools in Bârlad, and they are aged between 15 and 17 under the charges of infantile pornography and illegal access to an informatics system. Now, I agree with the latter charge. I dispute the first one. Anyway, these are charged for having broken the Facebook account of another female minor who was a student at the time in the 8th grade, and they entered her account and downloaded her private messagery and a photograph in which she appeared completely naked, and they also then they shared that picture on the internet and amongst the girls' classmates. The charging of these female minors for crimes that regarding access to an informatic system reconfirms, say the prosecutors from the area, the easiness with which kids left unsupervised in front of computers become both victims and criminals, being unconscious of the gravity of their deeds. Well, okay. The inquiry in this case has started following a complaint filed by an 8th grade student. The victim, named Andrea, was announced that by a friend that her Facebook profile picture is a picture with her in a pornographic position. The girl tried to access the Facebook account to delete the photo, but noticed that her account had been broken and the password had been replaced. She was also unable to recover the password because the person who hacked it also replaced the telephone number. Regarding the picture in which she appeared completely naked, the minor said to the prosecution that it was made a year ago when she was 13 in the bathroom of her boyfriend, a boy of 15 years old, also from the same village. She claimed that the photo was a selfie, so that means she made it herself with her phone, and then afterwards she had sent the photo to her boyfriend through her private messaging on Facebook. That's stupidity right there. But anyway, the research made by the policemen from the DA's office were going to reveal that the 14-year-old minor who had moved with her family into the city approximately a year ago, had become friends with 2 sisters from the city, Adriana, 17-year-old, and Laura Maria B, 16 years old, whom she was frequently visiting. Last year, between 9 and 16 February, the 14-year-old minor went several times to the place of these 2 sisters. During her visits, she used the computers, logging in several times to Facebook. Out of naivete or not knowing, the girl memorized the password on the computers of the 2 sisters. Thus, after she left, the 2 girls logged on her account, changed her password, replacing the phone number to recover the password, and their play, quote-unquote, play continued even further. The 2 girls checked the content of the private chat that the 14-year-old minor had with her friends, with which they discovered a hot, quote-unquote, hot conversation that the 8th grade student had with her boyfriend, and amongst the discussions they also found a photo in which she appeared in a pornographic position. The 2 sisters planned to embarrass their friend without suspecting that they could face criminal charges. The one that gave them their idea was their cousin, Valentin Claudiu, 19, also from the same village. The young man proposed them to download the photo and set it on as a profile image at the personal account of the student. The photography with Andrea naked became viral on the internet, gathering likes and comments and being distributed by the users of the social network. As if that wasn't enough, the two sisters also printed the photo and gave it to another girl who was a student in the 9th grade of some other high school. She took the photograph to the school and showed it to her classmates. Defending against the prosecutors, all 4 teenagers involved in this case have admitted their deeds, claiming that they weren't aware of the gravity of the deeds. At the end of the research, the DA decided to charge them, and also decided to charge the cousin that instigated them, as well as the minor who distributed the printed photo in the classroom. The 4 are now charged of infantile pornography, altering the integrity of informatic data, and illegal access to an informatic system, and also instigation to committing the first crime, deeds which, according to the criminal code, they could serve up to 7 years in jail. The policeman and the district attorney draw attention to the teenagers that they should use the internet and social networks responsibly, and that what may seem as a play or an adolescent in revenge can have consequences that can mark them for the rest of their lives. And this is the second case registered in the last 25 years in this county. Last year, two female students from the town of Hush were also convicted of 1 year and 4 months of jail, a suspended sentence, after they humiliated another female friend by sharing on Facebook compromising photos of her. Okay. First things first, what's the matter with these girls? I mean, I thought girls are pure and only boys are into this. Oh, wait. Secondly, if this had been in Spain, the consequences would have been more lax. I mean, in Spain, you can get 6 months for hacking a Facebook account, and that's pretty much it. The rest of those aren't exactly crimes in Spain, because in Spain, you know, age of consent is 13, and picturing yourself naked is not illegal in Spain, especially if you're over the age of consent, which is 13. So yeah, and this pretty much shows you what the absurdity of such laws. And thirdly, why do we even encourage them? And I'm serious with this. I think that some of these sexting laws are just downright insane. I mean, sure, all of the 4 teenagers in here are guilty of being stupid. What, risking 7 years in jail for that?
Yeah, I mean, if we would imprison everyone for who is stupid, then basically we would all be in jail, more or less.
Yep.
I mean, the idea that it's criminal to take a picture of yourself and send it to someone is like, why? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And you're 7 years in jail. It's just insane. You know, that's supposed to be if you commit a severe assault or rape or something like that, not sending a fucking picture.
Yes, and notice here that one of the charges is a boy, a 19-year-old young man, actually, for instigating to commit a crime. Because I can imagine, because I know the area, I grew up in there, and I can imagine something like this. They were having a coffee or whatever, and said, "Look, we had this picture of this girl, and we know her, and I don't know, it would be we want to humiliate her." And I can imagine him laughing and say, "Why don't you put it as a Facebook profile picture of her?" I don't know, I don't care. Imagine, I'm almost willing to bet that this was the way the discussion worked, and he's charged with the same crimes as everyone else because what? Why? And then again, I don't think. I mean, I can agree with the charge of illegal access to a computer system or informatic system, although even that's disputable. I mean, you saved the password yourself on that person's computer. I mean,
yeah, but I mean,
let me put it this way.
Like if you let open the front door of your house and someone breaks in, you're still committing a burglary. So
Fair enough, but on the other hand, you are using my property. For instance, if you come to me and you start counting your money, and you leave them on the table, and then you leave my house, and then you expect 2 years later, 1 year later, when you find out that I might have used your money to buy a car, oh, well, but you know, those were my money. Well, you left it at my house and you didn't say nothing for so long.
Yeah,
Is it
but
still
like
theft? And if it is still theft, is it the same kind of theft as if I were to come into your house and steal the same amount of money?
no, it's not
Serious
the same
questions.
kind of theft, but I don't think there's a reasonable expectation that by failing to log out when using someone else's computer, you give them somehow permission to use your account, or that this is or that such permission could somehow reasonably be inferred. Like if you're counting out money and you're putting it in your friend's house and you're leaving, that could reasonably be interpreted as you giving that money as a gift, but with the Facebook account that doesn't really work.
Okay, I won't try to argue against it. I mean, I don't understand, and I have to admit, I usually understand how the law works, but I don't understand in this particular case. I don't understand how the law works in here and in pretty much everywhere on the planet where I see similar cases. Why is this rigidity of enforcing laws that were meant to prevent or to punish perpetrators with genuine victims? And by genuine victims, I mean raped children. Now, I'm totally in agreement to let's just bury under the prison those who rape children. And I agree that it is an aggravating circumstance if the rapist also videotaped or photographed the victims and whatnot. I agree with that. But applying the exact same laws to petty nonsense like this? Why? And I remember reading a case in, I think it was in the New Yorker, but I could be wrong, with a man who ended up on a sex offender registry, that was in the US, because for allegedly owning child porn. Well, he actually did own child porn. It was a video of himself jerking off when he was 14. So yeah, it was child porn, but I would dare to argue that such things should be allowed entirely.
Yeah,
thank goodness I couldn't afford to have a video camera when I was 13 because it was bloody expensive and more or less complicated to get, even if you had the money. But anyway, that's a different story. Thank goodness I didn't have a camera when I was 13. Who knows what I would have done?
Yeah, but this is like one of the problems with the democratic process, where you basically, if you're a politician, you want to oppose these kinds of laws. That is very dangerous, because then your opponents can portray this as, politician X doesn't care about the safety of the children. He wants to allow child pornography and so on, and most people will not look into detail of these kinds of cases and so on. So, sort of being perceived as being tough on crime, and especially tough on crimes involving child sexuality and so on. That's very important as a PR strategy. Even though these laws are insane, and I think most people would agree that these laws are stupid, it's still quite difficult to actually tackle them.
Yeah, the best case I've seen so far against such laws was made by an individual that I utterly dislike, but he's extremely on point on this one. The guy is called Rick Falkvinge. He was until recently a member of the European Parliament on behalf of Piratpartiet, the pirate party in Sweden. And he has just Google falkvinge.net case against child porn, or something like that. Hold on a second, maybe I can find it. And very the 3 reasons child porn must be re-legalized. That's how the article is called. And obviously the title is made to attract clicks there, but essentially his argument is, look, these laws don't trap rarely, if ever, catch real predators, and those predators that it does catch, they would have been caught anyway, probably in the same period, most likely in the same period, and they usually trap kids like these who just made something stupid but not criminal or ill or whatever, something worthy of wasting taxpayers' money to jail them. And also a very good argument that I saw from him, and I think I'm going to start adopting it in its entirety, is why do we want, I mean, it's not illegal to videotape a murder. In fact, videotaping a murder and giving the footage, making the footage public or giving it to the police is something lauded as a civic duty. Because you essentially help catching the murderer faster. But however, if you by accident film someone raping a child, you're endangering yourself as well. And it becomes more rational for you as an individual to just delete the footage and perhaps leave a predator go instead of exposing the footage. And yeah, that means child porn, but at the end of the day, the rapist gets into jail.
Yeah, it's that is sort of one of the disadvantages of having clearly defined laws and so on, because having when you have exceptional cases like that, like how often does it actually happen that you just happen to film someone who's just committing a rape against a child? I mean, that's a situation that almost never occurs, and so it makes sense to put it specifically as an exception to a law. So it's just something that has to be decided on a case-by-case basis.
I don't disagree. I mean, the way Mr. Falkfinger made this argument in the context of, Google Glasses had just appeared like 3 days before he wrote the article, and he still had no idea that they would be a total market failure. He was thinking, what if these things become mainstream and most people would have them? Or and he later amended his argument, and even if they don't become mainstream, and somewhere someday, not too far in the future, there will be a case where most people would film their interactions, and he might have a point on that. Remember, we at AVFM, we project always be recording as a good way of protection. But anyway, at the end of the day, it may happen. Also, it may happen something slightly less complicated, such as, for instance, you see a pedophile touching children in the somewhere in the back alley near a park, or things like that, which may still trigger some legislative action or some knee-jerk reaction, maybe I should say. I mean, there have been quite a few cases in Sweden, in France, and definitely in the US and Britain, where police has been called upon because a man was photographing children in the park, or things like that. I mean, why?
Yeah, I mean, that is also sort of the problem, that this legislation against child pornography is not formulated in a way that is just conducive to protecting children from exploitation, but just has a sort of very general rules about not filming children in even in a sort of state of undress or something, even when it might not even be in a sexual way. Like, at least as far as I see, the only justification for these laws is to protect children from harm, and in cases where it doesn't do that, it's just completely unjustified. And I mean, in these kinds of sexting cases, there's just no justification there. Whatever, it's not someone exploiting these girls. That just unless you can exploit yourself or something. It's just they're taking pictures or videos or whatever of themselves, and if that sort of thing falls under child pornography or something, then it's just clearly something that should not be punished, because it really is a victimless crime, or I guess at most the quote-unquote criminal is the victim herself, and prosecuting that is just stupid.
Yeah, it is insane, and that's another argument that Folkvinger was making, that essentially the definitions have become so vague, and they usually do become over time due to judicial precedents and whatnot. They become so vague that they almost always lump together pretty much everything. Let me give you another example. It happened in Hungary. Thank goodness the Supreme Court quashed it eventually. It was a father was prosecuted for possessing child pornography. Well, if you're a sick bastard, you can believe that's true, because yeah, indeed, he had naked pictures with his son and daughter. Two of them were made when the kids were 3, and then another two were made when they were 6, when they were in a nudist beach somewhere in Bulgaria, I think, or in Greece. So yeah, he did have a naked picture of his children, but that's not child pornography, like, at all. And it was some vindictive neighbor or whatever who filed charges first, and at first in the First Circuit courtroom, he was sentenced, but then he appealed and said, "Look, these are the pictures. I mean, seriously?" And eventually he was acquitted. I mean, and the charges were dismissed. Thank goodness, and his luck was only that the kids were now old enough, something like 15 or 16, to be able to testify in court, and the kids came in and said, "Yeah, I remember that picture. We had a great time on the beach in Greece or Bulgaria, and it was nice. I mean, just what the fuck is wrong with everyone? We were never abused. Our father is lovely. What the fuck is wrong with you people?" But if that had happened when the kids were still young, or let's say 10 or 9, that man would still rot in jail.
Yeah, it's just these kinds of laws are very much liable to abuse, and as what I point I wanted to make earlier is, or what I made earlier is that it's just very dangerous for politicians to address this topic with the kind of nuance it deserves, and it's far safer for them to just roundly condemn things and not get involved in that sort of thing.
Yeah, and especially if you live in a country or area with a hysterical media, which is to say most of the countries. I mean, I can sort of see how a politician in Hungary could do this, but I could never see this being done in Sweden or in here, or especially in the United States or Britain. I can already see the Guardian in titles that politician wants to legalize the rape of children. I can totally see that. And in that regard, yeah, I guess you're right. And I don't think there is a solution for this, or at least not a political solution.
Yep.
And however, there might be a solution in a solution in which most of everyone else could contribute. I mean, look at this article. This article was that I read was reported pretty neutrally. I mean, the author of the article makes no value judgment, doesn't call them pedophiles, any of them, doesn't call them dangerous criminals or things of that nature. And even the prosecutor says, well, look, what the teenagers did is stupid. I mean, the law says that they're criminal, but yeah, they're kind of not. So the article is presented in a very fair manner, to the extent that you can present something fair when you're reporting something that's stupid. But unfortunately, this is not always the case. I mean, there was a similar case in Italy, and the media went on fire, basically blaming the oldest teenager in the group as being some sort of a creep and a rapist incoming and things of that nature. And that's sad. And I think this is where the media could actually lead and start to just question more often, or at the very least to stop being so fucking hysterical.
Yeah, but I guess being hysterical is probably more profitable in most
That
cases.
sells newspaper.
You
Yeah.
just want to sell those, clickbaity titles and, the
Sadly, you're right.
analog equivalent of clickbaity titles, which is, scandalous headlines and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
doing the sort of serious journalism is just probably for the most part is not as profitable, because people just don't buy that sort of stuff in large enough numbers to justify it. And I think what is very important is that we stop having this kind of reverence for journalism, of calling the fourth estate and so on, and thinking that they're these very enlightened and neutral people who sort of expose things that are wrong with society and so on. No, they're just sort of poorly paid people who sit at a desk and write up scandalous stories, and who most of the time don't really know what they're talking about and get half the facts wrong, and it's just it's just not a profession that that would deserve this kind of glamour or romance that is often supposed to exist with journalism.
That might happen. This drop in reverence, that might happen sooner than many of us might think.
I mean, it is already happening. People
Yes.
are rapidly losing respect for the media.
Yeah, and with the rise of the internet, with the process that I like to call the Great Equalization, where everyone can have their own documentary, everyone can have their own publication with little to no investment, because you can make a website that looks and functions like the CNN.com with an investment of like what, €200 initial investment. So it's not really that expensive. I mean, you can get a WordPress plugin to look almost like the CNN.com. And it costs like $60 for 2 years, or even less, to get a domain. And there you go, you have your own publication. Start writing. And with everyone being able to do this, this kind of drops significantly. And on the other hand, it has its positive effects as well. I mean, you can see investigative journalism in more places now. Admittedly, at first they're quite small, but the market is still rearranging itself. At least that's how I view it. And I experienced this with clickbaity titles and what sells and what doesn't. For instance, I wrote an article for AVFM a week ago called "Lying to Get Sex is Not Rape." It had something like 250 comments, something like 10,000 people read it, well, probably even more than that by now. It was quite well received article, and shared multiple times on Facebook, commented quite a lot on social media. And then I wrote an article called "The Genital Mutilation Rates Are Dropping, and That's Great." Less than 2,000 people read it, something like 30 comments, and nobody really gave a shit. Although I delivered probably the best news possible. I mean, it's fantastic news. Then no one gives a shit. So I guess
So a topic we had several times in the show is that just it's just a lot more difficult to sell good news, because bad news is just much more dramatic and exciting and so on, and you can get people outraged at these various injustices going on, and you can get people scared and so on. That's what people maybe not want, but what they actually read and what they respond to and so on.
They may not want it consciously, but they crave it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I can't blame them. I crave bad news too. I mean, I'm a news junkie, but yeah. And one last thing about this sexting stuff: maybe a good change may come simply by exposing a bit more about these ridiculous cases and start raising some skepticism amongst the common people about the laws themselves, and some skepticism about the thing about child porn and whatnot. For instance, this article had like something like 95% of the of the comments were included in some way, shape, or form this question. Well, if this is child porn, then what the fuck does that professor did? What the fuck did that professor did? And by did that professor, it means a university professor in Yash who was indeed jailed for child porn, but that guy actually had child porn, and that guy was a fucking pedophile. So it made sense in that case. And then this article also says, oh, but this is not the first case where children, essentially teenagers, are being jailed for naked pictures of themselves, or at least sentenced to jail because they get suspended sentences, but that's a different story. And then people are starting to ask, well, why do we apply these laws so broadly? Can't we just either scrap them or apply them more commonsensically? I know it's radical, but...
Yeah, I guess this sort of pressure of being seen as being tough on pedophilia and stuff like that is something that even makes sense to judges, because they don't want to be seen as the guy who lets off a pedophile or something like that, and it's just overall a very fucked up situation. It's very difficult to get sort of reasonable rules applied in these kinds of cases.
Yep. Okay, we've rambled quite enough, and we've dedicated over 30 minutes to the sexting topic, so I guess, as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing more to add. So...
Nope, neither do I.
Okay, so any final messages?
Take the red pill.
This has been a production of A Voice for Man. Lucian, Vâlsan and his guests, thank you for listening to the Voice of Europe. Special thanks go to www.eacdv.com/sounds for putting the sounds of the jingles at our disposal. We would also want to remind the listeners to take the red pill. Thank you for listening to us, and have a great evening. Ați ascultat Vocea Europei.